The Russians boasted about their seemingly never-ending supply of missiles.
After the SPN receives a signal of a missile attack, hundreds of our missiles are in the air from our side. It is impossible to stop them.
The Russians were particularly proud of their stockpile of S-300s. They were counted in the thousands. Such a quantity was indeed intimidating. But then a full-scale war began, and as a result, the Russians heard explosions. These frames capture explosions at a warehouse in the Tver region. Drones arrived there on the night of September 18th. These warehouses could have stored ammunition for Grads, S-300s, S-400s, as well as ballistic missiles for Iskander, and even a stock of North Korean KN-23s. This news is undoubtedly pleasant, but we still have a fly in the ointment for you. More missiles could have been delivered to Russia, this time Iranian ones. This was reported by the global media the day before. Allegedly, Tehran delivered 220 Fajr 360 missiles to the Russians via the Caspian Sea. And this raised many questions. For example, why do the Russians need Iranian missiles if they have their own? Could it be that the Russian Federation has finally encountered a production problem? Or is this all untrue? The Russians have long been begging for missiles from their militant friends. In September of last year, the then Russian Defense Minister Shoigu even visited Iran and persistently showed interest in local military developments. If the media speculations are correct, then the Iranians have indeed yielded, and the Russians received, as we mentioned, the Fajr 360. This is a ballistic missile. It was developed as a smaller version of the Fateh 110. This is the missile that the Russians initially wanted. As for the characteristics of the Fajr 360, its flight speed is 4 Mach. The launch mass is almost 800 kilograms, and the warhead weight is 150 kilograms. And the flight range is up to 120 kilometers. Not to say that it's a lot. However, it might be very accurate, and again a miss. The Iranians claim that the accuracy of the Fajr 360 missile is about 30 meters from the target. But the same Iranians claimed that the emptied missiles had an error margin of 50 meters. However, after the April attack by Tehran on Israel, experts concluded that the actual error margin is at least a kilometer. The situation with the Fajr 360 is unlikely to be different. But it's too early to celebrate. After all, it seems that the Russians need these missiles, not for their accuracy.
Russia wants to acquire this system to reduce the strain on its own stockpile of short-range mobile ballistic missiles, especially systems like the Iskander.
But all this is on the condition that the missiles have indeed been transferred. But would Iran take such a risk? That's a big question.
The lack of reaction from key players in the Middle East, namely the State of Israel, and other regional powers, suggests that the possible transfer of missile technology from Iran did not take place. I will explain what this is about. At one time in November 2022, when the first information about the possible transfer of ballistic missiles to the Russian Federation appeared, it was then referred to as Fateh, with a range of 300 and 700 kilometers. The head of Israel's National Security Council stated at a forum in Bahrain that if Iran transfers ballistic missiles to the Russian Federation, Israel would be ready to supply high-precision ballistic missiles to Ukraine. The reaction was immediate. Currently, there is no reaction from the official representatives of the State of Israel.
Experts are also puzzled by the reported number of missiles.
220 units, which, according to Western media, were unloaded in accordance with a ship that arrived at a Russian port and then transported to the Shalukov test site in the Astrakhan region. Accordingly, the question arises, why would the Russians buy missiles only to transport them to a test site? The explanations were that the Russian Federation supposedly intends to test the tactical and technical characteristics of Iranian missiles. However, this information is clearly contradicted by other reports that several dozen Russian officers have undergone training directly on Iranian territory.
As unpleasant as it may sound, the Russians have missiles, the same S-300s which the occupiers use daily to strike Ukrainian territory. Compared to the S-300, the FAZ-360 is not impressive. The Russian missile flies up to a distance of 250 kilometers, which is twice as far as the Iranian one, and the number of such missiles is estimated to be approximately 7,000 units. Plus, they continue to be manufactured in factories.
There are production capabilities not only for the S-300, but also for other means of destruction. As for the entire range, this includes Iskanders, Kinsals, and accordingly, other means of destruction. The S-300 accounts for about 30 to 35% of the missiles that the Russian Federation launches over Ukrainian territory.
But while the Russians managed to continue manufacturing missiles, the production of launchers for the same S-300 has stalled.
The Russians have problems with the S-300A and S-400 launchers. According to Finnish sources, the Russian Federation was forced to remove complexes from covering the airspace of the Leningrad region. And this is essentially the western border, the borders with NATO countries. This is scientific evidence that the number of launchers themselves is limited. I would like to remind you that in 2018, relevant intergovernmental agreements on military technical cooperation were concluded. Specifically, the transfer of S-400 anti-aircraft missile systems from the Russian Federation to the Indian side. As of today, the Russian Federation has announced the extension of this agreement until 2026-2028. And this is an international contract. This is a corresponding loss of positions in the global arms market. Therefore, there is no basis to talk about hundreds of S-300, S-400 launchers, even based on this fact. That is, there are likely only a few dozen of them.
So, in theory, the armed forces of Ukraine could destroy these few dozen S-300 complexes, or at least significantly reduce their number. And then the Russians will indeed likely be forced to ask for help from their few allies. Iran, it seems, will not be able to lend a hand to their terrorist friends. There are also the Belarusians with their Polonais, but there's a very important nuance. The Belarusians developed their MLRS together with China. If it comes to transferring the systems, the final word will belong to China.
The Polonaise MLRS is accordingly a joint Belarusian-Chinese production. It is a 301mm system adapted to the Belarusian wheeled chassis MZKT 7930. For the multifunctional Chinese missile system, the firing range of the complex, depending on the modification, can range from 200 to 300 kilometers. But without Beijing's consent, Minsk will not transfer the corresponding Polonaise MLRS to the Russian Federation.
The only option for the Russians is their friends from North Korea. Kim Jong-un will come to Putin's aid in a difficult moment. Let's be honest, he has already come. But the question of how many we are talking about remains open. Therefore, the only option here is to continue striking Russian depots, and remember that the Russians don't have that many S-300 systems. And when there are even fewer, we will definitely tell you about it and show you. In the meantime, like this video, comment on which weaponry you'd like to hear an analysis of, and subscribe to our new Arsenal channel. The link is in the details under the video.